Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey, Chapter 25. A sleepless night for Bulger and me, and what followed it. Interview with King Gelitis, my request and his reply, what all took place when I learned that the king and his counselors had decided not to grant my request, strange tumult among the Cultiquerps, and how his frigid majesty stilled it, and some other things. Not only had I been unable to sleep, but by my tossing about, I had kept poor dear Bulger awake, so that when morning came, we both looked haggard enough. I felt as if I had been through a fit of sickness, and no doubt he did too. At any rate, I had no appetite for the heavy meat diet of the Cultiquerps, and seeing me refuse my breakfast, Bulger did likewise. I had promised Schneebol to come early to the palace, for she had a number of questions which she wished to ask me concerning the upper world. "Good morning, little Baron," she cried in her sweetest tones as I entered the throne room. "Didst sleep well last night on the new pelt which Papa sent thee?" I was about to make a reply when Schneebol's hand, coming in contact with mine, for we had both removed our gloves in order to shake hands, she uttered a piercing scream, and drawing back, stood there, blowing her breath on her right palm, as she exclaimed again and again, "Firebrand! Firebrand!" In an instant, King Gelitis and a group of his counselors drew near, and pulling over their gloves one after the other, laid his hand in mine. "Glowing coals!" cried his frigid majesty. "Tongue aflame!" roared Frostiphes. "Boiling water!" groaned Glacier Boy. "Red hot!" hissed Ekicool. "Thou must leave the palace at once," half pleaded King Gelitis. "It would simply be madness for me to permit such a firebrand to remain within the walls of the royal residence. The intense heat of thy body would be sure to melt a hole in its walls ere the sun goes down." The royal counselors again drew off their gloves and laid hands upon poor Bulger, when a second alarm, even wilder than the first, was sent up, and we were hastily escorted back to our lodging house. No doubt, dear friends, you will be somewhat mystified upon reading these words, but the explanation is easy. Owing to worriment and lack of sleep, Bulger and I had awakened in a highly feverish condition, and to the Cultiquerps we had really seemed to be almost on fire, but our fever left us toward night, hearing which King Gelitis sent for us, and did all in his power to entertain us with song and dance, in both of which Schneebol was very skilled. Finding that his frigid majesty was in such a rosy humor, if I may be allowed to speak that way of a person whose face was almost as white as the alabaster lamps over his head, I determined to ask him for permission to cleave asunder the icy cell of the little man with the frozen smile, and ascertain, if possible, from the collar, which made up apparently of gold and silver coin, was clasped around his neck, to whom he had belonged, and where his home had been. No sooner had I proffered my respect than I noticed that the white face of the royal Gelitis parted with its smile and took on a terribly icy look. Methought I could look through the tip of his nose as though an icicle, and methought too that his ears shone in the light of the alabaster lamps like sheets of crystal ice, and that his voice, as he spoke, puffed into my face like the first flakes of a coming snowstorm. I quickly repented of my rash action, but it was too late, and I determined to stand by it. "Little Baron," spoke Royal Gelitis in icy tones, "never a heartbeat in a kingly breast that was purer and colder than mine, freer from the warmth of selfishness, and with not a single hot corner for ire or anger to nestle in, or for weakness or folly to make their hiding places. For thousands of years my people have inhabited this icy domain and breathed this pure cold air, and never hath yet one desired to strike an axe of flint into the walls of that crystal prison. However, little Baron, there may be some warm corner of my heart wherein cold and limpid wisdom may not be at home. Therefore, come to me tomorrow for my answer. Meanwhile, I'll take counsel with the coolest brains and coldest hearts about me. If they see no harm in thy request, thou mayest crack open the crystal gates that have for so many centuries shut the manlike creature in his silent cell, and take him forth in order to study the mystic words graven on his collar, but upon the strict condition that in cleaving open his house of crystal, my quarrymen so apply their wedges of flint as to break the block into 2 equal pieces, that when thou hast read what may be there, the 2 parts may be closed upon the little man again, edge fitting edge, like a perfect mold, so exactly that to the eye no sign of line or joint may be visible. Dost promise, little Baron, that this shall be as to our royal will? It seems meet that it should be. He questioned. I promised most solemnly that the crystal cell of the little man with the frozen smile should be opened and closed exactly as his frigid majesty had directed. It would be hard for me to tell you, dear friends, how happy I went to rest that night upon my icy divan, and how, as the tiny flame of my alabaster lamp shed its soft glow upon the walls of ice, I lay there turning over in my mind the strange and mysterious pleasure which was soon to fall to my lot when the quarrymen of King Gelitis should set their wedges of flint in this glorious block of ice and cleave it asunder. Even Don Fum, master of masters, had never dreamed of receiving a message from the people who lived in the very childhood of the world, and in anticipation already I enjoyed the splendid triumph which would be mine when I came to lecture before learned societies upon the mysterious lettering on the curious collar clasping the neck of the little man with the frozen smile. I imagine my anguish then, dear friends, upon receiving a message from King Gelitis the next day that his counselors had with one voice decreed against the opening of the crystal prison which stood in Schneebel's grotto. I was as if smitten with some sudden and awful ailment. I had never felt until that moment how keen the tooth of disappointment could be. I shivered first with the chill that made me brother to the Culticorpse, and then I burned with a fever so raging that a wild rumor spread through Gelitis's icy domain that I was setting fire to the very walls and roof. With wild outcries and faces drawn with nameless dread, the subject of his frigid majesty rushed pell-mell up the wide flights of stairs leading to the palace of ice, and pleaded for the king to show himself. In cold and frigid majesty, Gelitis walked out upon the platform and listened to the prayers of his people. "We shall burn," they cried. "Our beautiful homes will fall about our ears. These crystal steps will melt away, and all these fair columns and arches and statues and pedestals will turn to water and empty themselves into the lower caverns of the earth. The great window of our sky will fall with awful crash upon our heads, putting an end forever to this fair domain of crystal splendor. O Gelitas, hasten thee, ere it be too late. Let the little baron have his way before bitter disappointment transforms his body and limbs into tongues of flame to lick up this magnificent palace in a single night and dash its 1,000 alabaster lamps to the ground, a heap of shards, no fragment matching its brother fragment, but all a wretched mass of worthless matter. King Gelitas and his frosty counselors saw that it would be useless to attempt to reason with the people, and therefore turning toward them, he coldly waved his chilly right hand, and with an icy smile spoke frostily as follows: Go, Culticorps, to your homes, and be happy. What think you? Have I a heated brain? Doth my heart steam with foolishness, that you should think me capable of wishing harm to the tiniest Culticorp that spins his top of ice in my fair kingdom? Go to your homes, I say. The little baron is already cooling off, for he hath my full consent to cleave asunder the crystal prison of the little man with the frozen smile. There is nothing to be frightened about, my children, so eat hearty suppers and sleep soundly tonight, for my royal word for it, by tomorrow morning the little baron will cease to be the least bit dangerous to the peace and welfare of our icy kingdom. A cold good night to you all. In a short half hour, the panic-stricken Culticorps were all back in their homes again, and when a messenger came from King Gelitas to measure my temperature, he found such an improvement, a great improvement, that he opened his chilly heart and sent me a beautiful present from his treasure house, to wit, a small block of ice, clearer than any gem I had ever seen, in this heart of which lay a glorious red rose, in fullest bloom, each velvet petal opened out eagerly. Upon consulting my diary, I found that it was just 6 months to a day since I had left Castle Trump, and the loved one sheltered by its time-warmed tiles, and cold as was the covering of this thrice beautiful child of the upper world, I clasped it to my breast and shed tears. And this was the way it came about, dear friends, that King Gelitas and his frosty counselors were brought to give their consent to my cleaving asunder the icy prison wherein lay the little man with the frozen smile.